Jenni, thanks so much indeed for joining us here in Cannes. Is this your first time at Cannes?
No, it's actually my second time here. I was here a couple of years ago, and all I remember from that time was feeling hot and frizzy for the entire trip, time I was here, and I have a feeling that this year's not going to be much different.
It's certainly hot enough, that's for sure.
Yes, and the frizz is coming out as well. So, yes, you wouldn't believe how much product is in this hair to make it sit this.
Well, it's looking good. So let's get into it. We first met at the How Brands Grow for Executives course in Bordeaux. I found that very, very illuminating, and I thought these principles really apply certainly to the world of retail media. But there'll be many people watching this that really won't be familiar with How Brands Grow and the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute. So I'm just wondering whether you could give us a quick overview on
the elevator pitch.
That would be ideal.
Yeah. So How Brands Grow? Well, I mean, How Brands Grow comes from a legacy of work, first predominantly pioneered by Andrew Ehrenberg back in the 1960s, where he spent a lot of time working with panel data and package in grocery products and just understanding, descriptive work on how do brands grow and understanding a whole heap of underlying principles that come together into now what we call the laws of growth. And they're not laws in the legal sense, they're not laws in the absolute sense, but they give us framework for what to expect from data.
Okay.
And once you've got a framework of what to expect from data, then you can start to think about, well, what does this mean for my strategy of what's likely to work and what is not likely to work.
Okay.
And so the framework of the laws of growth, of which there are things like the law of double jeopardy, which is that small brands are penalised twice, they have many fewer users who are slightly less loyal, then open up a world of, well, that means to grow, if brands vary more in penetration than they do in loyalty, if you want to be a bigger brand, you must have to get a lot more penetration and you'll probably get a little bit of loyalty. That also tells you, well, if I've got a strategy that's aimed at loyalty first, probably unlikely to grow that way because that's not how it seems that brands grow. So there's a whole heap of implications that come out of that, but it basically came out of a fundamental understanding of how people buy and how brands compete.
So there's this real kind of importance and focus on penetration, I guess. The number of customers that have bought a product over a defined period, typically a year or so. But what would be the key elements that a brand can act on in order to increase penetration?
Yeah, well, the reason for the focus on penetration, even though actually when brands grow, they do grow by penetration and loyalty, but it seems like penetration is the lever that you have the most power to move. And that's simply because it seems to move most. And if you look at most marketing activity, if you are able to get someone, so penetration in essence means someone who didn't buy you in the last time period, buying you in this time. And if you get that, if you achieve that, you actually get, so you think about that's doing the hard bit, and if you do the hard bit, you actually get the easier bits as well, which is reminding someone who did buy you last period to buy you again. And so it's a byproduct, the loyalty growth is a byproduct of achieving the penetration. But to think about growing in penetration, you have to think about, first of all, you have to put yourself in the mindset of someone who knows very little about a brand. Because the vast majority of people who don't buy a brand don't buy it because they know a lot of it and gone, oh, I've really thought about this a lot, and no, you're not the brand for me.
It's not that they're rejecting it.
No, not consciously, not for a conscious reason of it. It's usually just they didn't think of it in the first place because they don't know much about it. And so getting yourself into that mindset means that you do things that expand the reach and capabilities of your marketing activities. And that's what then helps get people over that line from, I didn't buy you last time period, I'm buying you this time period.
And then you've got these, I guess, these two building blocks of physical availability and mental availability, and kind of still, I think, within the industry, unusual words that people don't instinctively understand necessarily until you explain it. But can you explain what do you broadly mean by physical availability?
Yeah, people often default to, they think mental availability is all advertising and physical availability is all distribution.
Right.
And that's basically all it is. You advertise and you distribute it, and Bob's your uncle.
And is that not right?
No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's more thinking of it like a system. So under mental availability, you have 3 goals that you're trying to achieve, and under physical availability, you've got 3 similar goals, and they are there's sort of 3 layers that you're talking to. So the first is scale. Because to grow, you have to expand your customer base. That means you need scale in your activities. And so under mental availability, scale refers to the reach of your activities. What's commonly measured in media is reach. How many brains did you hit in a particular time period? And in physical availability, scaling is presence, and that is that what channels are you present in? Are you where buying is or could happen? And how many of those channels are you in?
And is that more than just being available on the shelf?
Well, at the presence level, no, that is just that. But then the second layer of that is the branding aspect of it. And so just like with media, just throwing money at media doesn't mean you're going to have an effective strategy. And this is where a lot of the, the share of voice, share of market work gets it a bit wrong. It's just, yes, there's a relationship between the two, but that doesn't mean if you increase your spend, you will automatically get more sales, because you can spend money badly too.
Yes,
just like you can sell it well. So, so the second aspect is that every dollar you put out there and every brain you reach has to know it's from you. And so that's the branding aspect of it. Okay. And so choosing the brand name and your distinctive assets to make sure that you're really clearly communicating that it's unmistakably who you are. And then that's the mental availability side. And on the physical availability side, because often, and particularly in a grocery context or retail context, you might be sitting with a whole heap of other competitors. And even retailers, they're often in place. If you think about, for example, how many supermarkets there are within spitting distance of where we're sitting now, there's probably 5 or 6 different chains, right, that they're competing with each other. And so being able to be prominent and stand out from your environment so that you're easy to find is an important aspect of that. And that's your branding component across the two. Then the third component is relevance, and that is having something that suits what people are looking for. So first of all, you have to know what people are looking for, and that is what we call our category entry points, and that in mental availability comes under messaging, in that what are we communicating? How if I'm advertising to you, how do I want to change your brain? What do I want it to be? What was it before and what do I want it to be afterwards? And that might be reinforcing something you already know, because memories decay if they're not used. So you will forget if I don't remind you. Or it might be telling you something new that might not be like new to the world, but it might just be something you've not thought about my brand in that context. Sort of thing. So that's preparing the mind. But then on the physical availability side, you've got to have the product to back it up. So if I've convinced you that my drink is good for you to give to your young kids, then when you go to market, I've got to have a product that a young kid can easily hold and open up and do all those things. If it's really complicated or difficult, then you're going to go, well, I'm not going to give that to my kid because they're going to spill it everywhere and I'll get something else.
And I presume you've got to make that available where mums are shopping for.
Exactly. So that's where you've got to have the product in the channel of distribution, but it still has to be able to stand out. So all of those 6 things fit together into a system in how our laws of growth work.
So a lot of retailers now are launching retail media networks. It's a big theme, big topic. It can. It's taking an ever increasing share of total advertising income. But I think they're still true to say that many of them are wrestling with how best to package and position this to advertisers. And one of the things that I know that they're thinking about is how do they then help brands to think about how they can use the store environment and the store websites to drive, I guess, what in mental availability terms you might call distinctiveness or generating memorability to trigger a purchase.
But that's a question of, is retail media mental or physical availability is probably a good question to ask, because remember, mental availability is often about building memory structures. And physical availability and the prominence of it is when you're utilising them. I'm unconvinced that a retail environment is a very good environment for building memory structures. Do you think about it? People are in there, they've got a purpose, they're shopping. They've not only got the distractions of their own life that is hampering them from giving full attention to the shopping they're doing. How much time do they have to process the environment? And I know that we've had a similar discussion about this to do with search and the degree to which that is really physical availability, not mental availability, because it's getting people who are now in the market to then find the brand. So that's, I think, a big question for retailers to think about is are they working with mental or physical availability here? And I think probably some experimentation needs to be done to agree to which it is a conducive environment for building memory structures.
And would it be the case that if you and I were to launch a new product into a market and we made that available distinctively and prominently inside and perhaps outside shops, would that not create a degree of mental availability? And can't we all point to brands that have done that, particularly?
Yeah, possibly. I do know we did some work on online shopping, and we know that it's actually online shopping is a really hard environment for a new brand to get attention, simply because people tend to flock to the brands they have, and they tend to shop with a smaller repertoire online than they do in store. But even in an in-store environment, people are very good at screening things out. So you've somehow got to break through that. And then you've got to break through with something that requires people to process new information. So, it strikes me as retail media is much more conducive for utilising memory structures than it is for building them. So if you had a new brand launch, you have to do the work outside a store to then get people's mindsets right so that when they do get in store, you can harness what has already been built. Now, I don't know that for sure. I think this is something that needs to be testing, but just understanding how people shop, the mindset people are in, the environment people are in, I think it's a big ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting what you say about that online shopping, because what we observe is a lot of brands get their online listing, but there might be 600 or 700 SKUs in a category, which is, of course, the kind of the clutter that you're referring to. But as grocery shopping is increasingly done on a phone, you might be presented with only 5 or 6 of the 600 from which to make your choice. Now, if you can use retail media to push yourself into one of those 5 or 6, then you are solving the physical availability problem, because otherwise you would have been you would have been more or less out of stock, even if you were potentially discoverable.
Yeah, so but what is the cost of that though? And I mean, remember, you'll be paying for that each time, and so it's a form of what we call a rented prominence versus owned prominence. So owned prominence is what you earn from your distinctive assets from the brand you build outside of that. So if you're only going to get the rented prominence for the degree you're willing to pay the price of the rental. And if you're a brand, is that something you want to build in constantly into the price of it? In which case, you will get trumped by someone else who will just pay more money than you. And I mean, I can see how the retailer wins out in this, but I'm not really sure that the brand does in the long run. So
I'm just wondering though, whether if it is true that physical availability does drive penetration,
Well, everything drives penetration. So I think it's a false, not false, I don't think in work terms of drivers when it comes to marketing, whether we're talking mental or physical availability, because I think that implies a directional force that doesn't really exist, and an assumption of a constant directional force that doesn't exist. I see it in the mental availability work where people try to do drivers with things like category entry points or attributes, and they try to do, if you shift this by this percent, then this much sales will happen. I prefer to think of it as a system whereby you've got these 6 things. Now, where are you underperforming? And if you fix where you're underperforming, know that it actually affects all of the different systems beneficially. So, for example, if you've got the best media plan in terms of achieving reach in the world, but you've got crappy branding, it doesn't matter about your great media plan, you're still not going to convert because no one's going to know who it is. But if you fix your branding, suddenly you've amplified the effect of your media plan as well. Okay. And if you get all your mental availability right, but you are, and you might be on shelf and prominent, but you don't have the right product mix, then you're going to fail at the last hurdle. But you could fail at any of those hurdles and sort of stuff. So that's why I think they all drive penetration. And well, put it this way, they all have the potential to stop someone buying if you don't get it right.
So given that there is that interconnectedness and there's various drivers of physical availability and that drives penetration, there's various drivers of mental availability and that also drives penetration. A couple of things coming from that. One is that we observe very few brands measuring penetration at a retailer level. They tend to look at it at the market level, but if, in an Australian context, if I was a brand owner in Australia, I'd want to understand my penetration in Coles and I'd want to understand it in Woolies for sure. And I would imagine there'll be variability in those 2 things that I would want to try and address. And that's true in many, many other markets. But we observe that very few brands look at it like that. And if we were to ask the commercial teams of in the UK Tesco and in France Carrefour and in the US Kroger, for example, and say, what's your brand penetration? It wouldn't be a top of mind metric, or if it was, it would be very unusual. Any thoughts on why that might be?
I think partly it's a byproduct of data availability and what people can get. And I think in some cases, how penetration is, you never get a perfect measure of penetration because we can never get full market coverage. I would say our priority has always been on brain penetration in terms of brain, knowing that people shop in multiple stores. And if I buy you in the Australian example you're giving Coles, but I don't buy you in Woolworths, the reason I probably don't buy you in Woolworths is I'm buying something else in part of my repertoire there. But I'm still your customer because I bought you in Coles. So if I buy you in Coles, but don't buy you in Woolworths. So at individual level, it's just a reflection of the repertoire. But I do take your point that there could be some usefulness in understanding. You should essentially have equal penetration in both. And if you don't, then there's a question of why you're underperforming. Is it your range? Is it your shelf where you are located? Is it who you're competing against? It might be that Woolies has better private labels than Coles does, and so there's a stronger competitive set in there. So that would be a question worth asking. And one of my colleagues, Magda, who does a lot of work in this space, she is a very big advocate of de-aggregating data to understand those sorts of things, of where you're underperforming compared to other areas, so that you can understand both successes and failures, because it may be there's a reason why you're overperforming somewhere else, or it could be you're underperforming, and understanding how to redress that balance can give you insights that maybe can play in the wider market as well.
We're really very big fans of that disaggregation approach to try to get under the skin of what's working. And again, what we observe is in the industry is that you have this separation, and it is as though the brand and media agencies just look at the world of mental availability, and they provide certain models. MMM would be the most well known, to try to get under the skin of what's working, but they tend not to apply the same models in the same way to the world of physical availability. But as we all know, the physical availability, if you've got 3 SKUs listed in Coles, but 10 in Woolworths, my bet would be that your penetration in Woolworths will be off the charts versus what it is.
We would hope so, otherwise why are you paying for those extra 7 SKUs?
Exactly, unless you've got something really wrong with your
exactly.
Your product
so
mix.
stuff. I think I would say generally that physical availability measurement is underdeveloped. A lot of it has been badly measured perceptually. Like I see it in attribute tables where people will measure things like is a brand that stands out and is a brand that has a wide range and things like that. There's a question of what is the value of those, and then there's the capacity to do it at an objective level is challenging for a lot of brands to be able to understand, to go, okay, well, how many different retail outlets are there where my brand could be in Cannes? And how many am I in? And then what's the, actually doing that sort of maths, I think, sometimes you can get that information through the Nielsen's and that of the world, but it's still...
I think it's an organisational dilemma, because I think the media agencies and ad agencies and the brand teams, they do tend to think in terms of media and the things that they're really tasked with influencing. And I think they see exact question, what's my availability in the different stores in and around Cannes? Within those stores, what's my prominence? How many times when somebody shops was I visible or invisible, as the preserve of the sales teams? The issue with that, though, is that the sales teams typically don't really have much understanding of how brands grow. So you have this kind of interconnectedness opportunity. I think it's an opportunity. It's a problem, but there's definitely an opportunity, I think, for those businesses that can look at these problems holistically and kind of unpick those things. But from our observation, very, very few work in that holistic way. Do you see it similarly?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we wrote Better Brand Health, there's a chapter in there that's on physical availability measurement, where we tried to give some tools to help people do this, because it was something, as I said, because I'd seen it in brand health trackers but done poorly, and we're doing some R&D to see if we can improve that. So that's one of the things that we are working on, because we realise we have kind of neglected this aspect. Not neglected of it, there's only so many things you can research in any time, but that more work needs to be done. But yeah, I do think it's underdeveloped, and it's a shame, because what you have the risk of, and particularly remember being here at Cannes, is you might have great advertising that doesn't achieve sales, and it's not the advertising's fault, it's actually the physical availability that let it down.
It's the lack of congruence between the two.
And you said, so you got your great advertising, but then there's gaps in your physical availability, and that return is not achieved. And so we get, when we work on all of the different aspects of it, we get a stronger system in total. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people to think of, rather than think about these. I mean, you can think of them all as drivers, but if you think of them all as potential potholes that you're trying to fill, then to make a smooth road for the consumer to go from thinking of you to buying you, to me, that's a more apt metaphor. It's not that someone's pushing the consumer down there or driving them down there. It's that the consumer's quite happy to go there. We're just trying to hope they don't fall over and hurt themselves on the way.
Okay, cool. And any tips for how to help consumers avoid those potholes?
Well, Well, I
How to
mean,
smooth them out?
as I said, it's about thinking. I mean, the thing about physical availability that struck us in doing it is that you got, and I mean, it's the same with mental availability, but the thing is, you got to think ahead, but not too far. Because you can make I mean, for example, I bet you there's some brands who wish they could get that investment in the metaverse back right now because they, over-invested in that and that didn't go anywhere because they were too far ahead of the technology and there's always going to be some stumbles before you have successes. And predicting success is typically a pretty, challenging thing to do. Like if, put money on who do you think is going to win the AI arms race right now, I'm sure there are people betting on it, but I'm not.
There's certainly going to be a lot of people talking about it.
Oh God, yes. Well, that'll happen for a while, but eventually, it'll be like things. There'll be winners or losers in that category, and it will form and things like that. So predicting what that's going to be, there's going to be a lot of investments that won't pan out, and so being there but not too, being ahead of the consumer but not too far ahead is often a smart move given the amount of investment you have to make to build new physical availability channels. Even if they exist, if you don't have the expertise, buying in that expertise or using a third party for that expertise can often be really expensive. Whereas, using a different media, it's a little bit easier to dabble in that and to, let's try TikTok and put a few ads on there, or let's try this and put a few ads on there. It's very hard to go, well, let's just put a couple of products in that retail chain and see what happens, because if you don't commit.
It's a bit of a dilemma for brands, isn't it? I mean, do you advocate being a pioneer and testing and learning and figuring out what works, or do you, which is of course going to risk wasting resources, or do you suggest sort of sit back, let everybody else do that, and then jump on the one that seems to be working, but then you're at the risk of being the second mover?
Well, I don't think there's any problem being a second mover, and I don't think being a second mover means you don't test and learn. I think it's still a lot to learn. So I would encourage a test and learn environment, even if you think you know what's going on, because there's still so much. As a researcher, I know I'm not going to be out of a job anytime soon. There's still so many questions to answer. So I would encourage any organisation to have a test or learn philosophy. But do you need to be first? Well, I would only be first if I had a distinct advantage in doing that. And that might be I have a resource advantage, I have a capital advantage, I have something that gives me the ability to take that risk. But if you look at, the history of the companies that are really big now, they tend to have not been first movers.
That's very true.
Yeah, Apple.
I think Gillette and Pampers were neither the first blades or the first diaper.
So, but someone does have to be. It's a bit of a trade-off in there of how risk tolerant you are.
So I guess the funding for Ehrenberg-Bass comes from your sponsors, and that looks to me a little bit like a roll call of the world's biggest advertising companies, certainly a lot of CPG companies. What are the questions what are the hot topics for them that they're asking you to help them with right now? Well,
retail media is one of them, but basically understanding. I mean, there's a constant tension between building knowledge, building on the foundation knowledge we have, but expanding it out. So it is. I always find it interesting that there are a lot of misconceptions about our work, that we are very packaged goods and mature markets only. And I actually launched an A to Z where I've been going through different types of markets, showcasing some of the more unusual data that we've worked with. Because we're scientists, we'll work with any data that comes our way.
I think the principles hold true in B2B.
B2B, sure. They hold true in services, in durables. I just showed it for generative AI brands recently, even though it's a totally new market that didn't exist more than 5 years ago. There's still the fundamentals of how brands compete and how people buy still hold, or how people use in that instance. So, so I think there's that, but then you've got new tensions of, well, I think for us, what the the physical availability side is something we're putting a lot more attention on, because we know that that is an area that needs more expansion. But we're still doing all the old stuff as well. So it's for us, it's a constantly expanding thing. There's a few areas whereby we go, yeah, we can put that off. I once had someone do a PhD on negative perceptions for me, because I was curious as to whether I should be concerned about these, because they would pop up in brand health trackers every so often, sort of stuff. And so Max did a whole PhD on negative perceptions, and at the end of it I went, good, you've now taught me that I don't need to think about these anymore, because we know that they're not that important. Now, I'm not sure he was happy with that outcome, but I was happy, because it's always nice to cross something off your list of things that you don't have to worry about. But yeah, we've got still a lot going on, and there's there's always a tension between the trendy topics and the enduring ones.
Okay.
So we are constantly balancing that. So for example, there's a lot of talk about influencers right now, which instead I think should be renamed people media, because I think calling them influencers presupposes an effect that needs some evidence.
Is it not just word of mouth by a different medium?
I think it has all of the drawbacks of word of mouth and none of the benefits.
Okay.
Because historically, the power of word of mouth came from it was someone you knew giving you a recommendation, and most conversations about brands were done in the context of just two people talking that would then enhance memorability and stuff. When you have someone who is getting paid to distribute information, you lose that sense of, the power that word of mouth had. But you've also got a hell of a lot of clutter, because they're also getting paid from other brands and all of those things in here. Having said that, we have some people working on that as well. But then we've got Chandler, who's here with me today, and he's doing work on celebrities. And even though celebrity and the nature of celebrity has changed, the issue of should you put famous people in your ads and how do you use them to the best of their ability will always be there, because we're always going to have famous people, and there's always going to be some temptation to put them in communications, even if it's famous people in their own ads, because for products that they might have a stake in, which is becoming more and more common, where celebrities are owning brands and then they have to make a decision, are they going to be in the ads or not? You still have those sorts of decisions. And so that's the fun part of it, is that there are new evolving questions from old areas, but new evolving areas that we can think about in the context of what we already know and the laws that already exist.
And so if influencers and AI or some of the newer, what are the enduring ones? What are the...
Well, the enduring ones are things like just evaluating advertising and understanding how it works, knowing distinctive assets and how branding works and when you should change them, and how you do that across a portfolio. There's all of these sorts of questions that are still in play. I mean, things like portfolio cohesion become even more important when you think about the phone and the fact that you don't see the full range of brands.
Absolutely.
And so all of the methods for designing packs for variants that are dependent on the being iterative but different from the main brand miss the point that the vast majority of people are going to see the variant without the main brand there.
Absolutely.
So unless you've taught those main brand memory structures really well, that variant is going to fail by itself. And so having that...
We see that as a huge thing for retail media, for online retail media especially, where exactly as you say, in a store you're seeing the brand curated with a range of pack sizes that sometimes are right, sometimes are suboptimal. But in online it's completely different. You are shown a small selection that the algorithms deem might be relevant for you, but you're not at all presented with the...
Or if you're someone like me, like I search gluten-free, So that's my search term. So if I'm in bread and gluten-free, so I get all the gluten-free variants. So if you've branded it very strong as gluten-free, but not very strong as your core brand, I recognize it as a gluten-free, but I don't know what brand it is.
Yeah.
And so this is where thinking about, so this is where you've got an old problem, which is portfolio management and cohesion, new context, online and mobile shopping, and how do we make sure that our brands can show up and be easily found in that sort of environment.
Yeah.
Particularly if someone, they may just scroll through and you want them to be able to go, oh yeah, that's the one I want, and see it without even thinking about it. It's just an automatic process.
But and I think this is why one of the reasons that retail media is growing so fast. If I'm a gluten-free brand and I can see that that's what you're searching on, then it makes sense to me to bid to be prominent within the selection set that you're offered. And,
But if you are a gluten-free variant of another brand, that's where the tension comes into play. Because you have your parent brand, but then you've got your gluten-free variant. And so if the gluten-free code is blue and your brand code is red, how you choose
how do you
your blue
wrestle
and
with
your
that
red.
sort of, Okay.
So we have
Interesting.
researchers working on those sorts of problems.
Okay, that's
because,
brilliant.
we know that these are challenges, and the bigger the brand, the more problem we have with portfolio cohesion. So one of our researchers, Ella, has found that the bigger the brand, the lower the portfolio cohesion. She has a way of quantifying the strength of cohesion, which allows you to know what you're doing now, but also work out anything new. Does it increase or decrease your portfolio cohesion based on how you're utilising the brand's distinctive assets?
Very interesting. Now, before we close, you were telling me beforehand that you've been at the World Cup.
Yes.
And that you're a big Aussie supporter. So how far are the Aussie team going to go, and who's going to win the World Cup?
Well, I would love to think Australia will win the World Cup, but I'm not putting money on it. I think it'd be great if we advance to the next round, and if we could, get a bit further than that, that would be fabulous. I'm an optimist, so I will hope. But who's going to win? It's going to be really interesting. There's been some teams playing really well. Like, watching Morocco play, they were phenomenal. But then I was talking to the Brazilians around, and because they played a pretty crap game against Morocco, and they're like, "Oh, we haven't even started. We haven't tried yet." That Brazilian confidence, you never rule them out. The Argentinians could rally around Messi, give him a good sending out, even though. So I think it's still pretty open.
You're a fan of the Premier League. What about England? Do they have a chance?
I would love to see England win, and I will always support them as I see. Before Australia made the World Cup, which in 2006, I always had my other teams, because I would want to watch the World Cup, and it's more fun if you've got your teams that you're supporting. So I always had my other teams, which were a combination of Portugal, Spain, Argentina, and England. So so that was
semi-final.
That was
Portugal, Spain, Argentina, England.
There we go. I think there's a few other teams that might have something to say about that. But who knows? As long as it's a good competition, that's the main thing.
Indeed. Well, Jenni, thanks so much indeed for coming on the podcast. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and enjoy the rest of camp.
Likewise, you too.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.